Welcome back to another episode of The Political Life. Today, we are very excited to come to you from Denver, Colorado. And actually, unlike most weeks, I actually am in Denver, Colorado. Normally, I say I'm somewhere and I'm just, not there. I'm there via video chat. But today, we are at NCSL. And today, we had a morning speaker, Eric Bailey, that was just so inspirational. I'm so excited to have him on the podcast. Eric is president of Bailey Strategic Innovation Group, one of the nation's fastest growing human communication consulting firms. And we'll ask Eric to explain what that is. He's the author of a bestseller book, The Cure for Stupidity. So clearly I'm going to pick up a copy. And I have to say, the room, so people can choose. Well, let me just finish it. So he's been featured on CNN, Huffington Post, Forbes. He holds a master's in leadership and organizational development. And so at NCSL, this is the National Conference of State Legislatures, just for people who don't know. It has anywhere from this year, the first post-COVID, it has about 4,500 to 5,000 people. It can get as many as 8,000 people from around the country. It's a place for legislators to come and hear about what different states are doing. And they have speakers like Eric come in and just, give a different perspective. And people can choose what to go hear and what not. There's no required attendance. And I walked into this ballroom and there was not a seat to be had. I had to grab a seat in the way back of the room. And it was just incredible. And it's 7:30 in the morning. So, and people, a lot of people are out late. And so to see the room packed at 7:30 was just so incredible. And so Eric, he just got done speaking. And so Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so why don't we start off and just tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so a big question. There's a lot to tell.
Yes.
So we run a firm called Bailey Strategic Innovation Group, and we call ourselves a human communication consulting firm. So, a lot of times you're like, oh, is that marketing? Like, no, we don't do marketing or branding or anything like that. We actually help humans communicate with humans. And so wherever that goes wrong, right? So we work a lot with municipalities, local governments, state governments. We work with private companies, nonprofit companies. Basically, anytime there's humans that are interacting together and there's, an opportunity for that to go wrong, which it so often does, we actually help people work through those, kind of using basic universal brain science, which is psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, all of these to help people learn how to engage with each other better.
And so the talk was titled "Think, Therefore," using brain science to explain irrational behavior. So Eric, tell what did you do prior to founding this firm?
So I spent a lot of time, kind of working backwards in history. I was an international change management consultant. And so I worked with organizations across North America with a firm called Cotter International, one of the most successful change management firms in the world. And so I learned how big changes happen with big companies and big changes happen with small companies. I started to identify what's the psychology that's causing the friction. Before that, I was working with a healthcare firm and I was working in HR. I call myself a recovering HR person. And before that, I was doing marketing. I was doing graphic design, which is where my formal education is from. And before that, I was doing customer service training and management training. And that's kind of my path to get here. I just realized that the one thread that runs across it is human relationships, human connection, and human communication.
And as a slight tangent, you got to fly and actually flew for a short period in F16. Do you have a military background?
So
how did that come to be?
Yeah, so I'm not in the military, but I'm a honorary commander with the 63rd Fighter Squadron at Luke Air Force Base, and that's that squadron is actually an F-35 squadron. But there are no trainer jets for F-35. So they put me up in an F-16. And so I'm sitting in the back seat, and we were on a 45-minute flight. And we went like all the way to northern Arizona, all the way to southern Arizona, over the mountains, through valleys, over dams and rivers and lakes. And it was just unbelievable. And at one point, over kind of the test range, the commander, he gave me the stick. And so I was able to maneuver the jet around. And he said, okay, hit it all the way to the left. And I did it. And we did barrel rolls, and I was doing several barrel rolls, and we pulled 7 Gs, and I didn't black out. I did throw up, but I didn't black out.
That's incredible. Yeah, the F-35s are probably a little too valuable to let people. How did you ever? Wow, that's incredible. How did that come about that you were able to do that?
Yeah, so a good buddy of mine, she was speaking at a conference in kind of central Western Arizona, and she was one of the speakers, and one of the other speakers was the general of the base. And she introduced me to him, and he was building this leadership program at Luke Air Force Base, and we just kind of connected, General Brooke Leonard, and we just kind of connected on this whole idea of what leadership means. And we just became friends. We started talking with each other. I started doing some leadership workshops for him and his top 80 commanders. And the time came for this program, nomination for this program. And you need to be nominated by somebody on base. And it's, civic leaders, civic-minded people partnering with the base. And so General Leonard is the one who put forth my recommendation. So, the general of the base, it's going to happen. So I made it into the program, and it was unbelievable. We spent some time embedded in with a fighter squadron or support squadron, and we learn what they actually do, like what the ins and outs, and we advocate for them. We teach them, we work with them, they teach us, and it's an incredible program.
That is incredible. And so, Eric, your speech, I couldn't help but notice how just you're so good at it. It was so insightful. You were funny. Not a lot of ahs and ums, which I have a problem with. And you, even when the microphone cut out a little bit, you picked up on that, and you just quickly repeated that last statement. So, how did you become so good at this, and what was your first speech like?
So I've been speaking for quite a while. When I first started in my very first career, I was popping kettle corn at the Phoenix Zoo, and the gentleman who owned the company, he asked me very early on. He said, you interact differently with people. Like, do you want to be a manager? And I said, yeah, I'd love to be a manager. I didn't know what it meant. I was 18, 19 years old.
Right.
And so he put me in charge of some things and said, hey, do you want to run like the training? And so I'd love to run the training. And so I had to learn how to get up in front of people and train them. And it was terrible. I was really bad at it. And so what I realized is that I'm really good at authenticity. And so if I make a mistake, I say, oops, I made a mistake. And I kind of laugh at myself, and I don't, not self-deprecating. It was like, hey, this thing happened, and like, I'm not going to pretend it didn't. And as my career progressed, I found myself in HR. And as an HR person, you go to a lot of conferences, you sit in a lot of training sessions and go to a lot of conferences. And I cannot tell you how many terrible presentations I've sat through, like so many bad presentations. And I realized that if the speaker isn't going to connect with me personally, then there's no way I'm going to apply what they're trying to say to my work or anything. And so I realized as I start doing more training and I start speaking, I need to be able to connect with people. And I found that authenticity is the best way to connect. So I tell real stories about my life. I tell, real things that happened to me, real pitfalls that I've run into. And, some of the exercises that you saw with the finding the F's that people always get it wrong, or the Laurel Yanny where people hear different things. Like, I only know that. I know it's powerful because me and my wife experienced it. Like, how could you possibly? Right? So it's all real. It's all very real. And I do it so often. And I don't know if you saw, but in the back of the room, I have a camera set up just recording myself. And I watch my recordings back and I say, okay. And I have it zoomed out far enough that I can see the audience. And I watch for situations where people, pull their cell phones out or pull their iPads out. I'm like, oh, that's the part that they were disengaged. I need to punch that part up. And so, I've been doing it so long that I kind of tweaked all those parts. And it's pretty tight now. I I know what slide's coming next. And when you get there, what it does is I spend less energy focused on the content and what I'm going to say, and I can focus more on the weird things that happen. So when the mic cut out,
Yep.
I could hear that instead of being so focused on saying the right thing. And then, oh, I caught that, and I can just rewind and say it again. Or, when there was feedback in the microphone, I can kind of be playful with that, like, let me step back, right? And that's how I got there. It's just doing it so many times and just being authentic with it.
Well, it was really well done.
Thank you.
As Eric mentioned, he helps firms and companies with human communication. And he talks about, everyone wants to be in management, but no one wants to deal with difficult people. That made me laugh. And so Eric walks through and gives us different examples about perception issues. And so tell us about difficult people.
Yeah. So what we find, and so when I do this, I talk about, I say those people, and whenever I say those people, like everyone's got a few people that pop in their head. And the interesting thing is that I don't prescribe what defines those people, right? Because for everyone, it's a different set of things that makes it difficult to communicate with certain people. And what I've realized is the universal principles are all the same. It's I see the world the way that I see the world, and I have expectations that everyone else sees the world in the same way, or that everyone else has access to the same knowledge and perspective that I do. And when people react in ways that I wouldn't react, or that I wouldn't expect them to react, my first reaction is that there's something wrong with them. Usually it's their intelligence, like they're an idiot, right? And what I try to teach people is they're not an idiot. They just see the world differently. And our opportunity is to understand how they see the world, not to change their opinion, not to change our opinion, but to connect on a human level. And when we do that, I don't know if you ever had the experience like being fully, completely understood. Like it's one of the best feelings in the world. And I think that where we have this opportunity as peoples, we have this opportunity to give people that. Like if we understand these principles, we can give people that feeling of being understood. And you watch, their shoulders will go down, they'll relax, their tone will change. The fight will drain out of their eyes, and they'll just be kind again. We can disagree and be kind about it. It's a completely different conversation.
Being understood, and also we have all had experiences, if we're being honest, where we are absolutely 100% convinced that we are right. Yes. And it turns out we were wrong.
Right.
And so I always try to remember that when I think I'm right. There's been cases where, you've been dead wrong. And so you really know when those, and so.
Right. And it gets embarrassing, right?
Yeah.
So if we're holding on so tightly that I'm right, turns out I'm wrong. Like we just want to sweep that under I don't want to feel that.
Right.
And so what we end up doing is we push harder and try to prove why we thought the thing we thought was correct. And then we justify. And what that does, it actually separates us from the person that we're trying to engage with, because the thing we're talking about doesn't matter anymore. It's me being right that matters.
Right. And so Eric gave a few examples, and one that he mentioned was he puts up, and some of you may have experienced this, where he puts up a sentence and he asks the audience to count the number of F's, which I have done in the past. I think it was on an email, and I got it wrong. And I think in this packed room, there were only a handful of people that got it right. And so Eric walks us through these different perception issues. And one that was just unbelievable. Tell him about the Laurel Yanny, which was just, if you hadn't done it in a room full of people, I would not have believed it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So it's an auditory illusion. And so there's a recording of vocabulary.com, a recording of the word laurel. So, you go to vocab.com, you can click on that and it'll read the word out for you. Well, most people, when they hear the recording, they don't hear the word laurel. They hear someone saying yanny, like in a higher pitched tone. And what I do is I explain what happened, the story, how this was discovered, which is a high school girl in Virginia, I believe. But then I play the clip and I play it over and over and over again. And I ask people to what did you hear? And about 80% of the people, like, they raise their hand. I heard the word yanny. I heard Yanny. It's so weird. That's the wrong sound, right? Yeah, you included. And so it seems like when you have 80% of the people raise their hand, it seems like the entire room is raising their hand. And then I say, who heard Laurel? And then 20% of people raise their hand. And you're like, wait a minute, this has got to be a trick. And then our brains just, we cannot comprehend somebody else hearing something totally different. Like it's hearing, it's sound waves. It's
and at this point, you hadn't told us what it actually says. And so
Right.
I was a Yanny person, and I looked at the Laurel people like, what are they, deaf? I'm like, how could they not? That's crazy. How did they hear Laurel? I mean, it was Yanny, like a high-pitched Yanny. And then you proceed to tell us what actually it said.
Yeah. And so the word is actually being pronounced Laurel, but there's some distortion in the clip. And so people who hear Yanny, which is most people, are just tuned into the higher frequency tones and they tune out the lower frequency tones. And so your brain will just pick one. And your brain locks into the one you hear, and that's it. That's all there is what you hear. And it's fascinating what our brains do to justify that. Like we will say, what's wrong with you? How could you possibly? And we assign these people these kind of character traits. You're crazy, you're stupid, you're an idiot. And that happens all the time, right? Not just in these kind of things where we, right, these cutesy little break the internet type of things, but all the time, right? I make a very clear direction to you. I'd like you to do this thing, and then you do something else. And you're like, well, I thought you meant this. I was so clear, right? And we have these perception differences. And when you realize how often that occurs, right, you can see like, oh, maybe the world isn't exactly the way I see it.
Yeah, it's not. Our perception is not reality.
Totally.
It's yeah. And so when you go and work with companies and nonprofits, do you walk through these steps? Is that how you typically work?
Yeah. So there are 22 principles. We call them the principles of human understanding. And, I usually don't have enough time to go through all of the principles during a workshop or a presentation, like a keynote like this one. But we do is I work with a company and I sit and I meet with them and figure out what are the things that they're struggling with. What are the things that they always want to accomplish but never have the chance? And then I build a custom session or workshop or series of workshops for them. And I pull out the right principles that they need. And they're all very experiential, right? Just like the ones that you saw today, they're all very experiential. And it helps people relate to what has happened in their world when they've experienced it before. And then they can very clearly see how they can overcome it. And so that's what we get to do. And so we help companies build strategic plans. We help people build DEI committees and councils and whatnot. And how do we talk about this stuff that we've never been able to talk about comfortably? And I do workshops on crucial conversations and how important is it to, and how can we use the tools we have to talk with people about things that are difficult. And it's really powerful. And the results have been fantastic.
And then tell our listeners about the person that said, I don't need to hire another consultant, blah, blah, blah. And then walk us through that.
Yeah. So before I started my own business, I was an international change management consultant with Cotter International. And Dr. John Cotter, he's, Harvard Business School professor of 50 years, like one of the smartest people I've ever met, wonderful human being. And when I first started, he sat me down. He said, consultants are the enemy. He said, they come in and they tell you what you already know and they charge you an arm and a leg. He said, I want to train you to be the anti-consulting consultant. Right? I'm not going to have you come. I'm not going to pretend to know their business, like the company we're working with. That's their job. Like you can't come in and tell them how to do their job better, but you can be good at what you're good at. Right? He said you can be an expert in your method, in your methodology, and you can teach them how to integrate that into their work, and that's your most valuable point. Right? It's not telling, like when I'm working with NCSL, I'm not going to tell people how to be better legislative staff. That's not my role. I don't know how to do that. I barely even know what they do, right? But where I am an expert is in human communication. And if I can deliver them some tools that they can then choose to apply to their work, then we can have a bigger impact.
Whatever their work may be.
Whatever the work may be. Yeah. So it's kind of coming from a place of humility. Like, yes, I know a lot about certain things, but I'm very aware there's a lot of things I don't know.
And do you how many days a year are you on a plane or in an airport?
Quite a bit. Quite a bit. Yeah, the pandemic slowed that down quite a bit. And I was doing almost everything virtually. And I've actually gotten some responses from people saying that my virtual presentations are even more engaging than my in-person. I'm very engaging in person, but it's really interesting because people are so used to boring Zoom presentations, and I'm able to do it and keep it engaging. But what I found, like right now, I'm here in Denver today. I'm actually leaving on a flight in a couple of hours to go to Missouri. I'm speaking at an HR conference in Missouri. So every week I'm on a plane. But one of the things that my wife and I, we run the business together, we want to be very intentional about is family time is really important. And honestly, the pandemic taught us that. We love spending time together. And so every couple of trips that I take, I try to, bring my family, my wife, my kids. And, there's different parts of the country, different parts of the world we can explore together. And so, obviously if school schedules allow it and break schedules, but we always try to do that together. So next week, we actually have some work in Hawaii, and my cousin's getting married at the same time. So coincidentally, right? So we're all going to go out there and do that. So, it works out.
Oh, that's great. How old are your kids?
14 is my oldest, and he starts high school on Thursday.
Oh, wow.
Arizona, we start very early. And then my middleest is 10, and my baby is 9.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
And so for our listeners, and there'll be all of the various things will be in the show notes, but why don't you tell our listeners the easiest way and the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on my website, ericmbailey.com. M as in Michael. Interesting thing. The reason I use my middle initial is there's another Black speaker, former athlete, inspirational guy named Eric Bailey, based out of Australia. And he's been doing it a lot longer than I have. So when I kind of got started, I started getting emails that I didn't recognize. And I put together, it's like, oh, it's a different guy named Eric Bailey. And so I reached out to him, and we connected. He's a really wonderful guy. So when I wrote my book, The Cure for Stupidity, we had to put the middle initial in there for my pen name. So that's why you get the ericmbailey.com. But you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all of that. I'm not very active on Twitter, but very active on LinkedIn. But yeah, Eric M. Bailey, just search me out. You'll see me there.
And people can get your book at Amazon and everywhere else.
Yep. You can find it anywhere you can find it.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on. It was just a wonderful morning, and I hope our listeners have gotten a sense of what you do and what you're all about. And for our listeners out there, remember you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And you can sign up for our email at politicallife.net. And we hope you have a great week, and we will see you next Friday.